Welcome to the CDW Tech Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brian Matthews, and today I am joined by the one and only Sherief Ibrahim from Microsoft. So, Sherief, we've had an amazing relationship. We've been able to connect a number of times, both with customers, together with our collective teams at CDW and Microsoft. And when we were looking at guests for our Tech Talks podcast, you were the very top of my list. So thank you for joining us today. How's everything going?
First of all, I'm incredibly humbled. Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I'm really looking forward to this. I find every time we get a chance to talk with customers and with our teams, there's just so much going on. And so it's always good to keep up and see what we can learn from each other. So really looking forward to the discussion today.
Absolutely. Before we dive in, where on this beautiful big blue planet does the podcast find you?
Oh, I'm at my home here in Mississauga near Erin Mills, and was at the office a ton this week. It's been a ton going on, but for today, this Friday, I'm hanging out here at home.
All right. Work from home Fridays. I love it. So, Sherief, maybe just talk to us a little bit about your role at Microsoft and some of the things that you've been, asked to do in your role as it relates to Gen AI.
Yeah, you bet. And just a bit of background. I mean, I've been here now, it's almost 13 years. I've had the pleasure of working both on the consumer and the commercial or B2B side, in category and product management and sales. And most recently, I've been leading our AI business processes solution team here for Canada in the small, medium, and enterprise. So what that means is everything to do with things like Copilot, Copilot Studio, Dynamics 365 Power Platform. So all the different tools that can help an organization unlock their business processes. And there's no shortage of things that we're into right now as it relates to generative AI. I mean, it's right now, a lot of our customers, frankly, are just hungry to learn and see what they can learn both from us and from themselves as well from each other. And there's a ton of different topics. I mean, depending on where the customers are at, but I do find there's a couple of key areas that we're definitely seeing some trends, as I'm sure you are as well. So we could dive into any of those things for sure.
All right, absolutely. And I know you talked a little bit about your career path, but how did you get into AI? Right? I feel like I kind of stumbled into a role in AI, and I
Yeah.
now am. I've talked about that. I feel I have AI privilege. Right? I feel like I have an unfair advantage being in a role so focused on AI. But maybe just talk to the team about how you got into this.
It's funny. I'll be honest. Any party I go to, any get together I get to with family or friends, I'm finding more and more everybody has something to do with AI, even if they don't work in technology. They work in customer support. They work in financial services. They work in even in construction. And so one thing I'll say is it's clear everybody I know is getting touched or impacted in some way by AI. I do feel AI privilege though, as you do. I mean, I've been in the technology sector for 20 years. I was at HP previously. Phenomenal time there working on things like consumer notebooks. I came to Microsoft to help launch the Surface franchise, and I've worked around cloud computing now for about 7 or 8 years. And naturally, in the last 7 or 8 years, we've been working with AI, and it started as kind of these kind of small little things here and there that we would notice. For example, when I was a category manager and I would work on my forecast that we would give to our CFO, I remember the first year where we had machine learning come in and actually would be the forecast that we would get judged against. It was crazy. We'd sit back and go, wait a minute. So we spend weeks putting together these really intricate forecasts, and now we have a machine that's putting in a forecast as well. And I'll be honest, within the first year, I would say about after a year, we got to a point where a couple things happened. One is the forecasting time took a lot less. We didn't spend weeks doing our forecast. We actually got to a point of about, I would say, in days. And two, the machine was pretty accurate at doing it. So we focused less and less on that grunt work, and we started to focus more and more on other areas of the business. So I've had the privilege of working with AI for a very long time, but now, I mean, everything we do, it's all anchored around how do we help organizations safely, securely, confidently, really confidently bring AI into their workforce so they can start to see those kinds of benefits across the board.
Awesome. So I've got one, in the news headline that I saw recently, and I'd love to just get your take on it. But I'm a proud Canadian. I'm based in the Greater Toronto area, like yourself, and to see Microsoft announcing a $19 billion AI investment into Canadian AI made me really proud. I mean, we've got a global AI arms race. nations all over the world are doing everything they can to become a leader within AI. And obviously to see the commitment that Microsoft made to Canada, was incredible. So anything you can share on that or any initial thoughts on the big announcement?
Yeah, I mean, listen, first off, as someone who's born and raised here and owes a lot to this amazing country, incredibly proud moment to see that kind of a significant investment made in the country, whether I work at Microsoft or not. Just to be in the tech sector and see that was incredibly uplifting. It is the most significant investment Microsoft's ever made here. For those who don't know, Microsoft's been here for 40 years. We've actually got over 5,000 employees here. We help produce a significant portion towards the Canadian GDP. So it's already an incredible place to work and feel proud about. But this investment really is anchored on a couple of key things based on what we're hearing from the market and what customers are asking for. First and foremost, it's going to help build the cloud infrastructure that's actually going to power a lot of the AI that we'll need in Canada, which is fantastic. In fact, as soon as I believe late 2026, it'll be able to bring online a lot more capacity. So that's one thing. We just need more infrastructure to have this kind of horsepower. The second thing, though, is around sovereignty of our data, right? I think now more than ever, there's a huge heightened focus around making sure that, especially with artificial intelligence and it being so general purpose, we know where our data is, we have control over our data, and from a sovereign perspective, it's really critical. And so this will enable us to have a lot more control and sovereignty on our data will be on our soil. And then the third piece of the investment actually is more around skilling and enablement, actually. There's a effort that we have right now to help credential over 250,000 Canadians by the end of next year. And actually, last but not least, there's a huge investment as well in a security center actually in Ottawa. And so this is where we'll have AI researchers and engineers working with Canadian law enforcement. As we continue to see cyber threats on the rise, this is going to help us have the modern AI tools needed to battle modern AI cyber threats. So it's truly incredible from the infrastructure to the data sovereignty, increased security and privacy, and just helping Canadians be able to use this technology. It's incredible.
Yeah, so many aspects there. The threat intelligence hub in Ottawa definitely stood out to me as something that's really exciting to see. Again, Microsoft make an investment to help support Canadian government and law agencies in making sure that we are protecting Canadians, protecting Canadian businesses and Canadian interests. So we could probably spend the whole podcast talking about the announcement. Maybe we'll have you back and we'll go deep dive into Microsoft's commitment and investment into Canadian AI. But with that being said, just to set the stage, you and I, like I mentioned earlier, we talked to a lot of customers. We talked to a lot of, peers. You mentioned having conversations with friends and family. We are both, seen as AI thought leaders within our organizations. We're also individuals that are learning to use tools and adapt. And, I come across new things every day. So as we think about today's conversation, we really want to frame it from a couple of different layers. And those layers are really about Gen AI for the individual, Gen AI for the team, and Gen AI for the organization. And then what we're going to do is sprinkle in insights from Sherief and I, both on our own individual AI journey, what we see internally at CDW and at Microsoft, and some of the keys to success, some of the lessons learned, some of the lumps, right? This is a nascent technology that no one has a complete handle on. And then also from our, conversations with clients all over Canada. So, Sherief, how does that sound?
That sounds we know we got a lot to talk about. I'm super stoked. Let's do it.
All right, locked and loaded. So, big topic number one here, Gen AI for the individual. Lots of different things that we can talk about here, lots of emotions, lots of headlines around Gen AI. There's some fear, there's some excitement. Maybe just to kind of kick us off here, Sherief, talk to us about some of the things that you've done, that you're currently doing, and then maybe some of the things that you're doing to upskill around your Gen AI skill set as an individual.
Yeah, you bet. If you don't mind, actually, I'm going to jump in and just give a quick story about my 13-year-old daughter for a sec, because
Absolutely.
just to kind of set the context of how I see this technology broadly speaking, because there is a lot of fear and uncertainty, no question. Last year, she's in grade 7 just last year, and I came into her room and I noticed that she had on her screen what looked like code, like VS Code that she was writing. And she's not a coder, by the way. She understands like hour of code and some of the basics, but she can't code. And I stepped into the room and I said, what are you doing there? And she goes, I'm making a website. I said, how are you making a website? So my friend told me that I can use ChatGPT to build code and make a website. And so for my geology project, we're studying plateaus, and so I'm doing it. It's giving me this thing called Code Sandbox. It's writing the HTML, and here she's showing me a beautiful website she's built to kind of showcase her work as opposed to say a PowerPoint. And literally the next day, she was working on this kind of 3D model home with this software that she was able to find. It's fully sustainable with lamb wool for insulation and all these different things. And I sat back and thought to myself, when I was 12, I did not have, that kind of assistance at my disposal to do these sorts of things. Like it felt like this Jarvis moment where she's got these AI assistants and her capabilities at that age are phenomenal. And so I do try to come from a place of more optimism in terms of like with this type of abundance, how does creativity really get unleashed? How can we do things that we weren't thinking of before? So I just kind of set that as a piece just ahead of time as we're talking. So for me personally, I think, how I think about it, I actually love the sign above you there, be a warrior, not a warrior. You just got to get out there and do it. You just got to practice. And, don't worry about you comparing yourself to everybody else. Worry about yourself compared to yesterday and just you kind of making those incremental gains. Um, what's beautiful about this technology and why it's the fastest adopted technology in history is because it's so easy to use. It's using natural language. So if you're good at speaking, if you're good at communicating, you're going to be good at using AI. And, I think about the moments that I've had with, I'll give you an example, some early learning I had with it because it's multimodal. It can see pictures. I get ready for business reviews all the time. And I'm very analytical. I'm very good with using data. But, sometimes I don't want to spend that much time kind of combing through the data. I want to kind of get to the key nuggets and then focus on so what? What are we going to do about this? Or what's the insight? And so I would get these dashboards and I would take a screenshot and I would put it into Copilot. And I'd say, hey, here's my latest business snapshot. And here's how I normally summarize my business reviews. Here's the things I care about. There's like these 9 KPIs that matter to me. And I want you to take a look at this snapshot and then go back and recreate the summary. I would love to tell you that it worked in a split second and it completely eliminated all the work I would do for data. I probably spent about half an hour back and forth. Hey, I noticed you actually misquoted this growth over here. It's actually X percent year over year. Oh, you're right. Let me go and fix it. I would go back and forth with like this. And eventually I got to a really great outcome. And at the end, I said to it, can you now create a prompt for me? So the next time I give you this exact chart, you know exactly how to do this. And it created a prompt for me. Like in that example, that's something that you can't just go and take a course to go and learn. You've just got to kind of get in, experiment with it, and then start to see what those outcomes are and build on those outcomes. And so I can kind of go on and on about all the different examples and tool, but I would say just get out and start practicing. Don't wait and don't judge yourself so much on what you're seeing others do. Focus on your improvement yourself.
So much in there. First off, if your daughter is looking for an agent or an internship or a future signing commitment, CDW would love to have her, and I'm sure lots of organizations all over Canada would benefit from your 7-year-old daughter who's using coding to build a website. So fantastic. Second, I love the idea of just getting out there and taking one step at a time. Every day getting a little bit better. That momentum and that progress, right? 1,000 little steps will take you, really far places. So I love the way that you're approaching that. The other thing that you said that really, sunk in was after going through, a little bit of the trial and error to get ready for, that executive readout, you kind of completed the circle by saying, hey, in the future, how can I best ask you this same question, or what's the best prompt I could use to help you? And it brings up this idea of we've got this godlike intelligence, this superhuman intelligence at our fingertips, but how do we access it? And I think one of the keys to prompting that I've started to figure out is how do I make it as easy as possible for, in this case, Copilot or an agent that we've built to get me the answer. And sometimes it's beneficial to have access to every piece of information available, and sometimes it's not because it just makes the question that much harder. I've really started to dive into Prompt Agent, and I've kind of created a rule for myself that I don't ask Copilot anything until I've asked Prompt Agent to help me make the best prompt possible. And it's kind of this double whammy effect of I've got the ability to get answers or get an idea or bring together information, but I'm also asking the AI the best way to ask it a question. And I think sometimes there's a lot of confusion about what prompting is, right? Prompt engineering, like, do I need an engineering degree? Do I need to go, to Waterloo or, one of the other amazing engineering schools? And I think if we just demystify it and say, talk to AI like you would talk to a colleague, right? If you're asking your leader for assistance, right? Just speak to, AI in the same manner. That's not going to be perfect. And, again, prompt agent can help you make sure you're asking the right questions, but just so much insight into how you're using it, Sherief, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, I love that analogy you use, and I do tend to explain to people a lot, like, kinda talk to it like you would an intern as you're onboarding somebody, asking it questions. I mean, and then your point around the new prompt agent too is it literally from customer feedback. How do we make that more discoverable, more easy? Because you have to remember, one, how you communicate is important, but two, it can communicate with you just as effectively if you kind of practice with it. So tons in there for sure.
Yeah, one thing I would throw in, that I'm doing, and it's not necessarily an activity and it's more of a mindset, is I heard this idea of reflexive AI usage. And, again, it's not that complicated. Like I probably could have figured out, a term like that. But for whatever reason, it kind of just stopped me in my tracks and made me think, huh, like I'm unwinding, in my case, 18 and a half years of professional behaviors, doing things the way I always kind of did them, using the tools I always kind of had. And I need to unwind that a bit, just like everybody else does. And I've really challenged myself. I've got a sticky note right on my monitor here, reflexive AI usage. And
Mm.
to me, what that means is I don't even need to think about using AI, right? I use the prompt agent. I don't need to remember to go to prompt agent when I need to ask AI something as my first step. It's just the reflexive thing that I do. I don't Google nearly as much as I used to because I'm just throwing that into Copilot. Anytime somebody asks me a question, I'll ask Copilot first. Even if I think I have an A+ answer, maybe there's a perfect answer out there that, I can get an extra little tidbit of information. Anytime someone asks me for help, I ask, is there an agent that we have access to at CDW, or is there a tool within, the Copilot seat or any of our other, AI tools that can help answer that question? So, for example, someone came to me and said, "Hey, Brian, you've had a pretty diverse career at CDW. You've moved to different departments. I'd love to learn how you did that. And any advice for someone that might be looking to make some different moves?" And I said, listen, two parts to this conversation. First part is let's go to Career Coach Agent. And you should ask them that because mm, just quite frankly, they're smarter than I am. Now, I'll still give you my answer and my perspective and my journey and, my insights. But, just this idea that many of the things that my team is asking of me or, I'm asking of myself, there is, a place I can go to get information in a way that I couldn't before. So it's just such an exciting time.
No, 100%, 100%. I'll be honest, I haven't really heard of reflexive AI before. I just had to look it up. So I had to ask Copilot about it. But you make it a reflex, like you said. And I think that's a brilliant way to think through it. And I mean, it would be crazy for us to say to someone, can you do your job? Can you make sure to try to use the internet when you do your job? Like we don't even talk that way. And we won't talk that way about AI over time in the same way that it's just become an invisible colleague of ours in our day-to-day personal lives. It'll be the same thing at work. Um, One thing I will say though too is it's not as much as it's exciting, it's easy to use, it's natural language. There is a lot of effort required, I still think though, to get people to use it at different varying levels or more advanced levels. You and I are clearly enthusiasts and we're having a ton of fun with it. Obviously as a sales leader, I'm constantly looking at how we're doing on our performance. And so something I've been trying out the last 2 months is we'll go look at all of our upcoming renewals. And there's tons of, dashboards we have and information we have to kind of help us stay on top of these things. But I would actually take these renewals that I have. I would go and put it through this prompting exercise, kind of like I explained. I spent about half hour, 40 minutes with it. I got it to a good place. And now every other Monday, I can go in, and this is so cool because it remembers now. I don't even have to necessarily go back in for my prompt. I can say things like, "Hey, do you remember that Monday renewal work that we do together?" And it will say, "Yeah, it's the renewal work where you ask for XYZ, you want the comparison like this." So it remembers now, which is phenomenal. and I take a file. It's not fully automated for me yet. I go take a file, I download it from my Power BI, I throw it into Copilot with this memory, and it goes and produces for me a summary of where everyone's at, week over week progress, and a very basic kind of PowerPoint. And I send that out to people on that Monday ahead of all of our different huddles. It gamifies things for them because it puts it in a way that helps kind of show who's making progress on a weekly basis. It takes something that frankly, that would take me a couple of hours to go at that level by individual across all of the teams to go do that work would take me hours. And it's in a fun way that I can kind of motivate the team with. But more importantly, it's showing the team how I'm using artificial intelligence to do my job more efficiently, which means I spend more time with them. I spend more time with customers, and for me as a business leader, like customer time and people time, I know those are going to yield results over time. So I know as an early indicator, if I can do more of that, that's a win. And it also helps show them, okay, how am I considering using artificial intelligence differently, just like I'm seeing Shri for other leaders in the organization.
Great recipe for success, right? Spending time with customers, spending time with your people. Maybe one last piece on the Gen AI for the individual. We talked a little bit about there's a lot of emotions. There's a lot of headlines. Definitely, there's excitement, but there's probably an equal amount of fear. CDW released a recent Gen AI adoption report, and one of the key findings was that 32%, so nearly one in three Canadian respondents said there's nothing that would convince them to use AI at work. So, you talked about it. It takes a little bit of resilience, right? You got to keep working at it. It's not going to be perfect, right? Just like I don't expect myself to be perfect or you or a teammate to be perfect. I can't expect a tool to necessarily be perfect, but I do recognize that it's going to get better and smarter. But, just maybe quickly, what would you say to someone that, isn't where you and I are and maybe is really uncertain about using this technology and kind of what it means for their job security and, for their long-term career success?
I think the first thing is less what I would say to that individual. It's more what I would say to that individual's leadership and organization. And I'm going there first because, not every organization has clarity or is being clear with their people on what AI means to them as an organization. And so when that happens, people will fill in the blanks of what they think it means. And what they think it might mean is it might mean that it's here to replace me. That, my organization is not providing me with skilling. They don't really care about me. And unfortunately, we do find there are still organizations that don't have that kind of clear viewpoint that they're saying to their organization and their people, what does AI mean? How are we going to embrace AI? How are we going to use it? How are we not going to use it? So I would start there. But then at the individual level, if you are a knowledge worker, you're working with computers today, it's kind of like saying, I refuse to learn the internet. And I hate to be that bold, but I think it's even bigger than that. And, maybe there definitely are going to be some people at a certain stage of their career where maybe they're feeling like, hey, I'm going to retire soon. I'm really not interested. And that's one conversation. But for everybody else, this is like the internet. This is bigger than the internet. You've got to learn how to use it. And I think what's really key is um, it's not the same for everybody. The best way I would put this is, I mean, look, Brian, you use Excel. I use Excel. We both use PowerPoint. We're going to use those two tools vastly different.
Yep.
And sure, I may see you pull up a great version of a Excel with a power pivot and a bunch of stuff in it. And I might look at it and tweak it and play with it. At the individual level, what you can do with this tool for how you create things, how you learn things, like I would even start there. You can learn how to use AI with AI. You can learn any topic in the way you want. I'll go back to my daughter as an example. She has the memory set up in hers where it only talks to her in Gen Z slang. And so when she's talking to it, it's like she's talking to one of her buddies, her peers. And she can learn topics really quickly. She can help have it build tests for her so she can quiz herself and learn a topic very rapidly. So my message to the individual is don't miss what is the bigger than the internet. And instead of being scared, go and use it to actually learn. Go and use it and ask it, what can you do for me? What are some things you can help me with? It'll ask you questions. Well, what do you do for a living? What matters to you? And I think that kind of practice will help you get over the fear of it because you'll realize it's not perfect. It makes mistakes. It does need good prompting. It does need some good help. But I would really start at the leadership level first because I worry about that quite a bit. And then I would really kind of bring it back to the individual around Just a missed opportunity here with this unique moment in time.
Yeah, really well said. I think, there's lots of historical, comparisons we can make. You talked about the internet. There was a lot of fear around that. I remember I was in grade school and the initial instructions was you can't use the internet to do research for a project. That's cheating, right? Clearly, you know, 25, 30 years later, we've got a different, approach and we've learned how to use it. And, not that there isn't problems with the internet, but, we've come a long way with adoption. I think the computer was going to take all of our jobs. Other technologies, through human history, have had similar fears. So, great insight there as at the individual level. We'll pivot into our second big section here, Gen AI for teams, right? It's really about collaboration, control. I know you and I have had a number of, really fiery conversations around control, new ways of working. So, as we zoom into teams, right? You're speaking to a lot of teams. I'm speaking to a lot of teams. I'm sure you, although you have a day job, are asked by other teams at Microsoft sometimes, just like I am at CDW for advice and tips and tricks. But maybe we'll start with control and governance, right? Super hot topic. Lots of really exciting announcements at Microsoft Ignite from a couple of, I guess, a month or so ago now. Time flies when you're having fun. What's top of mind for you as it relates to control and how we think about making sure that people are, leveraging these tools, but are doing it in a secure way and not putting any, data governance at risk?
Yeah, this is by far the biggest question and biggest concern we hear from everybody we talk to, right? Hey, I want to make sure when Brian gets access to Copilot, he doesn't see a document that Shreve's working on that he's not supposed to, or he's seen something in terms of sensitive information like customer data or payroll information. So security is definitely a big thing, and making sure it's under control is key. The other thing, though, around control too is adoption. This is an investment in the company. It's an investment in your people and your resources. You want to make sure people are using it. So I could talk about both of those. The first one I would say is, and we've had Copilot control plane for some time to allow IT professionals to kind of manage and look at, hey, which department is using it, or which people are using it, that sort of thing. But now with Agent 365, we're giving organizations, I guess, all the lessons we've had in terms of A, how do you manage people in your organization with things like Intune, Exchange, these sorts of things? How do I manage people within the organization? And also, how do I manage things like SharePoints, things that people can create and sprawl and create en masse? And you kind of start to replace those learnings with, well, what about agents? Because if I open the door and allow people to start creating agents, are they going to get used? Is it going to consume a lot of resources? Are people going to actually have a good experience and keep using it? Or are they going to have a bad experience and never use it again? And there goes our investment. So there's a lot of things that companies are thinking about and considering. With Agent 365, this brings everything into one place. And it doesn't matter actually what platform you've built the agent on. It doesn't have to be that you built the agent with Microsoft. It could be with an agent that you built on Google or Amazon or any other platform for that matter. But it gives you a visible control plane so you can see who's using the agents. Are they getting leverage? You can set up policies like, you know what, if an agent hasn't been touched in 3 months, let's email the owner to have it shut down. Or if we see patterns where an agent is trying to access information it shouldn't, let's go and shut that down. And so now you suddenly have agents almost like you do in an organization where they have an Entra ID. They actually have privileges, just like a person would. I don't want this agent to have any privileges beyond this set of data. So those kinds of controls, I mean, in the same way that you would want to manage the controls and access of an individual in your organization, it should also be an artificial individual in the organization. And it shouldn't matter how and where you build that from. We're giving you a tool to be able to manage that en masse. So that is really there to help the CIO, the CISO, the chief security officer be able to have confidence they can bring these things in securely. But then for every business leader, being able to know, are my people taking advantage of this? Which departments are taking advantage? How do I go and create champions and create energy in different areas by finding the pockets of success and spreading that more broadly? As much as it's a technology story, it's a human and a change management story in a very meaningful way. Even here at Microsoft, we've been very open that when we first even started to adopt Copilot, we saw in the very beginning great usage, and then it started to kind of taper off. And when we started to dig into it, it came down to education. It came down to, well, how do I use it as a seller? How do I use it as a finance professional? What should I do as a marketer? We had to spend time with people to imagine those scenarios, teach those scenarios. We took time to actually go out and put together content like here's the seller 6 prompts for the week. Here's the 6 prompts for a marketer for the week. So there's a lot of different ways that we want to drive that adoption. But the best place to start is with data. You have to have visibility to see who and how it's being used in a safe and secure way so you can feel confident that people have access to it and you can then deploy the right resources to help teach people how to use it effectively.
So for the second time now, we've talked about these agents and leveraging these tools just like another employee, right? So we talked about communicating, prompting it just like you would communicate with an employee, treating it from a security perspective, just like an employee, and making sure you're putting the same types of guardrails around it. So clearly there's a theme happening here. And was unplanned. It wasn't part of our pre-plan, but just it's amazing when we have these conversations and some of these things kind of continue to bubble up. One of the things that I wanted to throw at you again from that same Gen AI adoption study is that 45% of executive and senior level individuals um, indicated that they are using unapproved Gen AI tools at work. Right. And, that is scary on a lot of fronts. We're talking about control and governance. And there might have been a theory that it was just, new and career people that didn't know any better, or, people that didn't, have access to some of the knowledge here. Clearly that group of people has access to the most sensitive, proprietary and potentially confidential information within an organization. What would you say to any, senior executive level individual out there that's maybe just using the same tools they use at home because they're comfortable with it and they've got some, familiarity with it?
I don't even know where to start. Honestly, that is I'll tell you what. I would hate it, Brian, if you found out suddenly that some very confidential information about CDW showed up in somebody's ChatGPT prompt, right? Because as you're using those external tools, you're training those models. And so any of the private information, if you're uploading files, if you're giving anything that is, I go back to the newspaper test. If you don't want it to be out in the public domain, you shouldn't put it out in the public domain. And the beauty is right now we have free tools available for you to do that within your four walls, compliantly with commercial data protection. Many of our customers already have a version of Microsoft 365 that already comes with a free version of Copilot that you don't have to pay any extra for. You can put files in it, you could put PDFs in it. You can ask it questions. It's only on your tenant. It's only on your data. Nobody can see it. We don't train it. So education, like this comes right back to education. Education is everything. And every time I get a chance to meet, this week I had a chance to talk with a CEO of a company here in Ontario. And so we were getting started to talk, and there was some really interesting news that came up about his company. And I ended up actually showing him how I'm using sales research or our internal sales research to prepare for meetings. And we ended up spending about 10 minutes just talking about some of these new developments and how rapidly these things are happening. The technological pace here is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Every week there's something new. So you have to have at least something that is not new, something that's been around for a long time, is making sure that you're working with trusted and secure partners that care about trust and security. And so putting it out there in the public domain, big no-no. You have access to great secure tools, and if it's not from us, it's from somebody else. Take full advantage of those, absolutely.
All right, last question on the Gen AI for the team here. You talked a little bit about this already in terms of what Microsoft was doing to try and inspire, teams of individuals around adoption. But maybe you know, can you expand on that? Whether it's, internal at Microsoft, from organizations that you talk to, like how do we find these pockets of success, or how do we find these, Gen AI champions? And then how do we, take their learnings, their excitement, their successes, and, kind of tee them up to a broader swath of the organization to kind of inspire more adoption from the teams?
This is honestly where there should be the most excitement and fun. Like if you're a leader right now listening to this and you're thinking, how do I get my teams to think about using this in a good way? First of all, think of the message you're sending to your people when you're doing things like creating an AI task force or an AI center of excellence, a champion community of some sort. You're saying to them that we care about your skills, we care about developing your capabilities here with AI, And, it could be something as simple as, promptathons. So we find a lot of customers are loving these promptathons where we have a chance to come in and teach some of the basics, but it's all practical and relative to your job. So if you're a finance professional, you're spending the day learning how to prompt like a finance professional. And how can that help you? Um, but I'll say things like promptathons for education are great, but I'll be honest, Brian, you got to have a system in place. And even at Microsoft, we do have an AI transformation group, and we did a lot of things like kind of some of the fundamentals, gamification, start with data, which team put it out there for every manager to see, access to dashboards to see how is every team using it. We actually do a lot of competitions. You'd be shocked, right? A big sales and marketing organization, we love to compete with each other. And so we had the Copilot Cup last year. And we actually sent a few people on some very nice trips for different reasons. One for people who use it the most, people who showed the most improvement. This year we now have our Frontier Cup. And so this is taking it up a notch. Instead of just encouraging people to use kind of Copilot every day, we have a lot more advanced agents now that we work with, researcher, analyst. We have deal agents. We have a number of different specific agents we've built for our different workflows. And so now we're looking at that to measure usage of that and have competitions around that too. But it's not just about competitions like I mentioned before, having role-based guides, like let's go find the sellers that are doing this really well and come up with the seller 6 prompts of the week. Let's go find those people that are using it in finance. And I'll tell you, they want to share with everybody. When you do find folks, when you go and ask people who are, hey, raise your hand if you'd like to come and share some best practices, you're always going to have people that do that. And once you have a few, it becomes that wildfire. So I know I'm saying quite a bit, but I would say it's good to have a system in place. Have a council of some kind that's cross-functional across the whole organization and leverage data, leverage gamification, and leverage some of these tools around education to get people excited and starting to use this.
Yeah, I loved everything that you said. Some data to back up from our perspective. When we measured the comfort levels of using Gen AI in the Canadian workplace, three of the biggest positive benefits, three of the biggest things that organizations can do to drive more comfort is have an AI policy, right? Provide formal AI training and provide approved AI tools to use in the workplace, right? So if there's three things that I would encourage people to take away from our conversation today, if they're just starting or maybe they've started and haven't had the success that they'd want, it's ask yourself, do you have an AI policy? You mentioned AI council. Have you provided formal AI training, right? And then have you provided, approved AI tools to your workforce? So great conversation there. Sherief, we'll pivot to our third section before we wrap up. But this is really big picture, right? This is Gen AI for the organization, right? So I know you and I have talked about frontier firms and, the work Microsoft is doing, the work that CDW is doing, the organizations that we've seen across the world really move early and fast into, this technology wave. So to kind of kick us off here, um, there's lots of research around Gen AI pilots and AI pilots, and a lot of research indicating that not enough of those pilots are getting into production. So, as we think about that, and as we're speaking again at an organizational level, you know, how can we help more of those pilots get into production? And how can we help organizations, you know, see the ROI to continue to make the investments, to continue to drive more and more innovation as it relates to their organizational AI adoption?
So there's a lot in this. There's a lot in this. So a couple things I would say, and talking with so many CFOs, because look, we can talk about things like productivity gains. You mentioned very specifically pilots and POCs, and a lot of the things we talked about earlier on the individual and team level, they're good productivity gains. But as a CFO, you have to make an investment here, and there has to be some kind of ROI that you can see and feel and touch in order to justify it. And I think one CFO in particular, we've heard talk about it like this, I think is brilliant. When you think about managing a portfolio in any business, there's always going to be a portion of it that is going towards more risk, high risk investments where maybe you don't necessarily see that ROI very clearly. And I think I'm gonna talk about this in two different planes. On the one plane, you having your people with access to approved AI tools in a safe and secure way might feel squishy in terms of ROI. It's a little bit squishy. but it's like not giving them access to the internet at the dawn of the internet. And so there's a bit of it. You got to put a chip on the table for that one and just kind of go, hey, look, the market's going this way. We got to be there. But you also have to put your chips on, then you have to find a place where you're not putting your chips on the table, where you have defensible, meaningful return on investment. And so that's where you get into things like, are we adding digital labor to the workforce to solve a problem that we can't hire our way out of? Yeah, perfect example, you've heard me talk about Dow Jones Chemicals, for example, or Dow Chemicals rather, for example. Dow Chemicals built an anomaly detection agent to go through thousands of their shipping invoices to find where they would have additional rebates that they'd have access to. They could never hire enough people to go do that work, and they're going to find nearly $1 million in cost recovery there. That's a pretty big example, but it's an example where it was a very fit for purpose business use case. It added digital labor to the workforce for them. It added capacity they couldn't otherwise bring in, and it's going to meaningfully add back to their P&L. So when we talk about this idea of a center of excellence, of having some type of a council. Part of it is education, but part of it is how are you doing the intake of these cases? How are you identifying, well, what are we going to go spend our time on? Because where most companies get stuck is every department is out trying to do something on their own. They're maybe trying to bring in a best of breed solution. They're just experimenting off in a corner versus having a cross-functional team that's looking at this with the CEO and saying, if we're going to really invest our time and energy in this, what are the top three, maybe 2 to 3 agents that as an organization we feel are the best places to start? Maybe you do that by department level. Hey, what's the number one for finance, for sales, operations, et cetera? Or what are the 2 to 3 at the top level? And I'm reflecting on a conversation I had with a pharmaceutical company. This is last November. And I was in there talking to the CEO, and I started the conversation with, hey, what do you think about AI? What do you think about it today? This is last November, just a year ago. And he said, well, I know my university daughters think it's a big deal, but I'm not really convinced yet. And we went around the whole table and he was blown away that, half of his organization was using it for some pretty cool things. The other half, we're not touching it. And by the end of the conversation, Brian, we identified two really heavy use cases for them. One was around currency arbitrage, where they're moving pharmaceutical products throughout Europe. And so as the currency fluctuates, think about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars of shipments and 1 or 2 points. That's a big change. And the other was around government rebates and how it's hard for them to kind of keep up. And once they kind of anchored on those two kind of big ideas, they spent the next 8 months getting their organization prepared for AI, right? Getting the right tools in the right people's hands, working through the data estate, working through security, because they saw a real tenable, meaningful ROI for them to go identify the right pilots that would eventually get into production. So that's a long answer, but I think it's not one thing. It's about, again, having a system. How are you thinking as an organizational leader of having a strategy around AI that's mapped to your business objectives, that meets the organization and culture where it needs to be? You've got to equip your people with this tool in a safe and secure way, because this is the future of how we work with computers, is the future of how we kind of work in general, but also having really defensible and meaningful use cases that are aligned at the leadership level, not a bunch of small use cases happening in kind of pockets of the organization.
I'm going to throw a thesis out to you as it relates to Gen AI for the organization, and I want you to pressure test it. And you know, if you think I'm wrong, give it to me straight, Sherief. I value your opinion, and would love to get your take on this. So I believe one of the biggest flaws in strategy for most Canadian organizations, based on the research that we've done, is related to the fact that although this is one of the most disruptive technologies of our generation, maybe ever, right? Most people would agree with that statement. Every single customer I talk to will indicate they do not have enough or all of the AI skill sets and capabilities that they need to be successful. Yet only less than 1 in 4 organizations are reaching out to third-party trusted advisors and consultants for help. So this is a wildly disruptive technology. They have an AI skills shortage, and their plan is to do it alone. So tell me why that isn't one of the major flaws in the vast majority of organization strategies.
So if I put myself in our customer's shoes, and I'll tell you what I believe I'm seeing and related to what you're describing, and let me replay it. It is the most disruptive technology in multiple generations for sure, probably in our history for sure. Um, Organizations don't necessarily have the skills needed, and they're also not necessarily running out to talk to third parties. I will say we got a lot of customers talking to us and asking questions. I think what we're finding is they're not necessarily running out and speaking to everybody because it's still so new, and they want to be careful they're not being sold to, right? Like like you said, it's a land grab right now. And if you're a CEO or you're a CIO, they're getting hit. I was talking to literally, we had an event the other day, and two CIOs said this to me. Their inboxes are flooded with third party experts trying to speak to them. So I think they're inundated, and I think they're just trying to sift through the noise. And that's where they're looking for proven capabilities, proven partners. And I'm finding more often than not that the feedback I'm getting is we don't want to necessarily experiment on this stuff. We kind of just want to know what's working. Like if there's you mentioned that anomaly detection agent, can I go get that? Like where do I go get if it's someone in IT, they'll say, give me the reference architecture for that. If it's someone in the business, they'll say, can I buy that agent? And so I do think people are overwhelmed. I think that's really the crux of it is people are just overwhelmed. They're inundated with information and it's difficult. And so this is where trusted names like CDW Canada, like Microsoft become very important because we can help shepherd them through that noise. And I think what we need to do more quickly is help them see value quickly. You mentioned something earlier about the data piece of it. Listen, no one good bad data in, bad data out, bad output out. You don't have to start with this really big advanced use case. So, for example, we created something ourselves to help solve internal employee help desk tickets. We have hundreds of thousands of tickets that we deal with every year across Microsoft. And I think the stat that last was, I think it was something like 80% or 70% of them are handled by people. And so we went out and created an employee self-service agent, and it is completely focused on one area, which is internal employee self-service for IT. And then we opened it up to HR, and then we opened it up to real estate and facilities. We had very specific areas where we had good data already. We have good policies in place. We already keep up with content management and those things. That was a great place to get started. Small bite to chew, very focused data, very focused place, and away we went. And now we've taken that to customers and said, hey, this is a pretty popular use case. You can have access to it as part of Microsoft 365. And we're finding other of these types of templates we're putting into Copilot Studio, like a retail shopping assistant. That's one that we're finding retailers around the world are gravitating to, a financial reconciliation agent. So having these kind of templated approaches, I think people are really looking for as well. And they're looking for it from proven places, again, to kind of cut through the noise.
Yep. Yeah, and I love the idea there. And you and I have talked about this Copilot chat being the gateway to Copilot for M365 and the additional features of plugging in Copilot to your Microsoft suite. And I think about a lot of the agents in the same way, right? So, maybe it's easier for some organizations just to leverage existing agents from the agent store, like researcher, like prompt agent, like, analyst as they start to understand and learn about the technology and get in there. So last question here, and I know we're just time is flying by in terms of this section, but we've talked about governance, we've talked about control. Anything additional you want to add at the org wide level, considerations for business leaders, IT decision makers from a control perspective?
No, I would just reiterate some of the key points. It starts with leadership. You have to have a perspective on this. There has to be some kind of a center of excellence that is cross-functional in nature. And look, the tools are there now. The tools are available, and so we're happy to help to kind of help you manage those things and be able to get control over it. Because this is about equipping your employees so that you don't have the haves and the have-nots, where some people have access to safe AI and some don't. And they're going to find a way to go use it, and you're starting to really identify those meaningful use cases that are going to really deliver value back to the organization.
All right, Sharif. So let's just recap. We've talked about Gen AI for the individual, the team, and the organization. We've talked about, some trends that you and I are seeing, some things that we've done in our own journey, right? Some of the new tools and technology to help us control and help other organizations control this incredibly powerful technology. So just a big thank you, Sharif, on behalf of CDW, on behalf of the podcast, on behalf of the broader team and anyone else that's listening. So I've got kind of a two-part final question for you, Sherief. We're going to end on a positive, exciting note, but two-part question. What's the Gen AI story that not enough people are talking about? And what part of this whole, disruptive wave gets you the most excited?
Oh boy, that's a cool question. Um, and again, I'm humbled to be on this one with you. So thank you so much for having me. I think something we're not taught. I made a comment earlier about like that Jarvis moment that I saw with my daughter. So I think this is the cool thing we're not talking enough about, and it's around memory and context. And it's this Jarvis moment I had probably. It was in October. It was in October because I was heading to. Okay, so I use Copilot and this thing called Pages we have. So when I'm asking Copilot questions, after it creates a certain amount of content, I want to kind of jump in and start editing it. So some people take it, put it in Word or put it in something else, but it creates a page. So like next to Copilot where I'm chatting, there's a page now and I can edit stuff and I can continue to talk to Copilot. It can actually edit the page with me. It's wild. It's like I have a collaborator right there for brainstorming. So when I was getting ready for a big keynote I was doing at a kickoff for one of our customers, I had a strategy of how I was going to do this presentation. I was going to zoom out, talk about some of the trends in AI. I was going to zoom in and talk about it from a retailer industry standpoint because I was talking at a retailer event, and then zoom in a little bit deeper and talk about how it's applicable to this retailer based on some of the things we're doing. So I worked on my outline. I've got a couple of really great stories. You can tell I get excited and how I prepare for these things, right? So now I'm driving. This is like 2 weeks later. I'm driving around and I said, I want to rehearse a bit. I'm going to try out Copilot M365 Copilot on my phone here while because I use it all the time in the consumer version just to talk to it. So it comes up and I'm just like, hey, do you remember that presentation we were working on together for customer X? And it said, yeah, you had set it up where you wanted to zoom out and then zoom in and do this. And in that moment, I was like, holy smokes, this thing remembered that presentation from a few weeks ago, the structure. And so I jumped in and I'm like, okay, I want to rehearse a couple of the stories. Can you remind me about that story about this, XYZ? And we started going. And in that moment, I was like, man, I'm talking to my Jarvis now, I'm talking to my assistant. It remembered this work I was doing. It's helping me get sharper and smarter at the place where I'm at in that moment. And I mean, that's one of a dozen micro examples, but I feel like with memory and with the context of who I am, it's learning about my style of communicating. Like this is huge for me. And why it's huge for me is very simple. I am spending so much more time with customers, with partners, with people, and I'm learning a lot faster. And I'm not doing that at the expense of being stuck on my screen all the time. And the fact that I can even now do that with voice to me is very liberating. I love technology. I don't want to be in front of a screen all day either. So there's just so much excitement in that for me in that moment and what it means for me. Like imagine a year from now, imagine 2 years from now. It's really something.
What a perfect place to end. Thank you for sharing your AI aha moment. I look forward to hearing more about your journey, what Microsoft is doing, and obviously the great partnership between CDW and Microsoft. So, Sherief, thank you so much for joining today. And I hope you have an excellent evening, and we'll chat soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Brian. Have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Take care.
All right. Cheers.